Hey soccer fans, welcome back to the Feed the Fire podcast. This is your host Nick, and today I'm going to wish everyone out there who's a Fire fan happy birthday, because on this day in 1997, October 8th, 1997, the Chicago Fire founded as a club, and it was also on the 126th anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire. I waited the extra day to record the podcast. I usually do it Monday night. Tonight I'm doing it on a Tuesday, just in case there was something special that might happen on this birthday. And sure enough, we got one of the biggest announcements of the season from the club, that Gregg Berhalter has been named the next head coach and director of football for the Chicago Fire. We're going to get into all of that tonight. All the comments, all the feedback. There's already a lot of hate going on online, go figure, about this hiring, but I think it's a positive one, and we're going to talk all about it tonight. Also, happy birthday to me. I turned 40 over the weekend, and let me just tell you, my knees turned 40 a long time ago. The rest of me finally caught up, but it's nice to finally hit the milestone and just, start celebrating anniversaries instead of birthdays, as people have been saying. Couple housekeeping things before we dive into all the Chicago Fire news. You can find me on social media at Glasshouse Soccer. You can email me, glasshouseSoccer@gmail.com. And please go look up the Battered MLS Fans YouTube channel. I just finished recording an episode with them, as well as Ty Fisher from Wise Men Say podcast, talking about the Gregg Berhalter hire. Kind of a rapid fire, condensed, here's 20 minutes of all the highlights of things, comparing it to his Columbus tenure and what we'd expect to see in Chicago. So go check out the Battered MLS Fans YouTube channel, as well as all the other Chicago Fire channels who are covering this. CHGO Fire, Men in Red 97 Media, On Tap Sportsnet. Go check them all out. It's all been great conversation all day since the news was released this morning. And speaking of that news, let's get right into it. Here's the official announcement from the Chicago Fire, as released 9:41 this morning, October 8th, 2024. An accomplished sporting executive with 30 years of experience, Berhalter will oversee all aspects of the Fire's sporting operations. That's the tagline there. I don't know how strongly I buy into the accomplished sporting executive title they've given him. He was kind of a dual coach, general manager, technical director when he was with the Columbus Crew prior to becoming the USMNT coach. But yeah, definitely 30 years of experience is something that has really been lacking in the Chicago Fire front office, especially all that MLS experience. Okay, here's the actual article. Chicago Fire FC today announced that Gregg Berhalter has been named the club's director of football and head coach. With the appointment, Berhalter becomes the 10th full-time head coach in club history and will oversee all aspects of the Fire's sporting operations, including the first team, CF2, and the academy, reporting directly to owner and chairman Joe Mansueto. So he answers only to the owner. He has been given full reign of all the sporting. So now we can kind of see the trifecta of the Chicago Fire organization, with Mansueto as the owner up top, and then his authority flowing down to Berhalter and Dave Baldwin. And hopefully Berhalter can have the same success on the pitch that Baldwin is having in the boardroom. With 30 years of professional experience as a player, coach, and sporting executive, Berhalter joins the Fire after a successful tenure with the U.S. men's national team, in which the team won 3 major trophies and returned to the FIFA World Cup. Berhalter will formally begin his new role with the Fire following the conclusion of the 2024 MLS regular season. Current head coach Frank Klopas will step down from his position following the team's final regular season match on Saturday, October 19th, and will transition to a new role as vice president of football. So, yes, technically he did have a very successful tenure with the USMNT, pretty much dominating CONCACAF for the most part and winning those Gold Cups and Nations Leagues, but falling short of a lot of people's expectations on the broader global scale. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But what's interesting in this paragraph is that Klopas is going to become the vice president of football. So is he going to be Berhalter's number 2? Is he still going to have influence over the actual players and team? If it's Berhalter's job to oversee the first team, the second team, and the academy, and if Klopas is reporting to him, does that mean Klopas is going to have a lot of input as to roster selection, player signings, player development, academy philosophy, things of that nature? That worries me a little bit. We have seen Klopas continue to fail in all of those aspects during his various tenures with the Chicago Fire. So that is concerning. I'm hoping this is kind of a failing upward kind of a situation where it's like, well, we can't get rid of him. We don't want to get rid of him. Honestly, I don't want to get rid of Klopas either. He does have a lot of value for this club. It's just not in any sort of technical or coaching sense. So maybe it is just the failing upward kind of thing. He's being rewarded for being the good soldier here with the club, and hopefully he doesn't have too much direct influence. But that remains to be seen. Now we get a quote from the new head coach himself. Or I'm sorry, from the owner here. After a thorough and detailed search that included a number of exceptional candidates, it became clear that Gregg Berhalter was the right choice to lead our sporting operations. His previous success in MLS, where he thrived in a dual role, and his experience leading the U.S. men's national team over the last 6 years make him an ideal fit for our vision for the club moving forward. I'm confident that under his guidance, we will build on the foundation that has been laid over the past 5 years and be an organization that Chicago will be proud of and reflects the values of our city. I expect that Gregg will create a competitive culture and return our club to its winning ways, said Joe Mansueto. That was a big quote, and there's a lot to parse out in that quote. First of all, our search included a number of exceptional candidates. I'm sure they looked at a bunch of different resumes. I hadn't heard any rumors or leaks or indications of anyone other than like Jesse Marsch last year and Gregg Berhalter, and that was about it. And of course, I don't think Marsch was a real candidate considering he wanted something more than an MLS club. And hey, he got it. He got it with the Canadian men's national team. So I'm skeptical for how many candidates, especially because Mansueto placed such emphasis on Gregg's experience as a dual role executive head coach when he was at Columbus. However, on the optimistic side of things, this is me purely speculating and being very glass, cheers, half full here, that because of that dual role, maybe there's a plan already in the earliest stages where Berhalter will be this director of football and head coach for 2, 3, maybe 4 years. And then in those 2-3 years, he's developing the next head coach. And then he can transition fully into director of football. As an aside, I got an email from Ryan saying, hey, what about Josh Wolf? There's some relationship there. Maybe Wolf could come in and be part of Berhalter's coaching staff and be groomed to kind of take it over. That'd be an interesting one. He hasn't exactly made a lot of people in Austin happy, and however, if that is his first MLS coaching role, you tend to either find a lot of success quickly and keep it, or not. And he did not keep the early success that Austin had in its expansion season, but you learn from that. In my own personal life, the first management job I got, I was okay at best. I screwed up a lot of things. I did not know how to manage people, and I did not know how to be a manager. I was always a good employee, but now I had to try and be a good manager, and there was a lot of failures that I experienced. Moving into other management roles, I was much, much better equipped and had much, much better results because of all the mistakes I made in the first one. And they weren't necessarily mistakes, they were just finding ways that didn't work for managing the people that I was managing in the industry I was in. So maybe Josh Wolf has more success if he comes and kind of works his way up with Berhalter's staff. So Ryan, if that is the case, if you do want to see Josh Wolf kind of be brought along as a potential replacement head coach for Berhalter as part of a future progression that might already have been discussed, again, speculating here, that's the way I would like to see it happen. The last little part of that quote from Joe Mansueto is that Gregg will create a competitive culture and return our club to its winning ways. Obviously, you're not going to be losing anymore unless you're taking home wooden spoons. But he used the word culture, and I'm sure he deliberately used the word culture because there was so little of it over the last several years. The last time you saw club culture, and by culture I don't mean like tactical identity, I mean just like a good locker room. I don't know. as I think Wiki lost the locker room pretty quickly. I think Paunovic, as much as he was a decent tactical coach and maybe liked by some of the players, when you're not getting the results, you're going to lose the locker room, you're going to lose the fans, and I don't think he was as supported as Wiki was to a certain extent by some of the ownership. So hopefully it all falls into place for Berhalter here. The article goes on with another quote from Joe Mansueto, which says, "I also want to sincerely thank Frank Klopas for all his hard work this season. His love for the club and city is unparalleled, and he played a key role in helping to recruit Gregg to become our new director of football and head coach." Oh, interesting. I didn't realize Klopas was that into the recruiting of the coaching there. So as much as I dislike Klopas's influence in certain positions, at least in this case, I can get behind the hiring of Gregg Berhalter and him recruiting him in. Now we get to hear from Gregg Berhalter himself. He says, "I'm honored to be named director of football and head coach of the Chicago Fire, and I'd like to thank Joe Mansueto for his trust. Chicago's an incredible city." He, of course, lives in Chicago still. "Built on communities of hardworking and passionate people who truly love soccer. I look forward to working alongside our staff and players to transform the Fire into a world-class organization that all our fans in the city can be proud of." Very standard quote from Berhalter here. Not trying to make a huge splash, not trying to ruffle any feathers or shake any branches here with his opening press conference, but very solid quote. The article talks about his accomplishments with the U.S. men's national team. Does it talk about his Columbus? Nope, doesn't talk about his record with Columbus, but as you know, prior to the USMNT, he was a head coach in Hammarby in Sweden with the Columbus Crew and then with the U.S. men's national team. The one accomplishment coaching Hammarby was that he became the first American-born male to manage a pro team in Europe. His biggest accomplishment in MLS as a coach was getting the Crew to the 2015 MLS Cup, losing that one to Portland. We also get a quote from Frank Klopas here. "I'm truly thankful to have had the opportunity to serve as the head coach of this great club once again. My love for the Fire runs deep, and I want nothing more than to see the organization return to the top of MLS. I've known Gregg for many years and have great respect for him, both as a person and a professional. I'm excited to welcome him to the Fire family and look forward to supporting him during the next chapter." So that is Frank Klopas. Again, a very safe kind of a quote. Not that we're used to Frank saying anything crazy or out of the ordinary. So very safe kind of quote there. And the rest is just kind of filler stuff about his coaching background and his playing background. So you can always go back and check that out on the Chicago Fire website. That is the official announcement. Now, when I saw this morning, as I opened up my Twitter feed as my computer at work was loading very, very slowly, I thought to myself, oh boy, I'm not going to bill a lot of hours today. There's going to be a lot going on social media and online and a lot of things I'm going to have to keep up with. And for the most part, I was able to limit my phone to very limited use and get all of my billable hours in for the day. But I was very excited. It's a very exciting hire. First of all, anytime your club gets a new coach, it's going to be an exciting type of atmosphere. It's going to be an excited feeling. You're going to look immediately to all the opportunities and potential and all the great things that you want to accomplish, and he's finally going to be the guy to do it. On the flip side, we're all Chicago fans. We're Chicago Fire fans. We've been here many, many times before. We have been burned by false hope and glimmers of hope, and we've all seen the memes about the cycle of get your hope up, get it dashed, something happens, get your hopes up, get it dashed, something happens. We've been there repeatedly. Wash, rinse, repeat. Right, Chicago Fire fans? But this seems a little bit different. Gregg Berhalter is not of the same mold as Ezra Hendrickson, who I think was a better player than a coach and whose philosophies didn't follow MLS. I think he's different than the mold of Frank Klopas, who hasn't really adapted or brought a modern tactical approach to coaching because he was so used to what he was doing before. He's different in the mold of Paunovic and Wiki, who were used to working with European teams and European rosters and rules and that sense of things. So I think Berhalter is in a different mold than all of that, as well as the dual role of director of sporting. He is really going to shape this club from a football side, from a soccer side, in the image he wants it to be. And for someone who has managed and played around Europe and the United States. I think he's got the experience there. Now it's just, can he put it all together? I think he can. I hope he can. I'm going to be optimistic. Very rare to hear that from me, the lawyer and Chicago sports fan, but I'm being optimistic here, and I think he'll be able to navigate what's going on within the organization as well as what's going on within the league. So that was my initial reaction. The other kind of funny thing that I thought is, we have been hearing for the last 3 years, fire Berhalter, fire Berhalter, fire Berhalter, regarding the men's national team. Maybe the subliminal message is just stuck, and people just kept associating fire with Berhalter, and here we are, we've manifested it. Potential some very Michael Scott, The Office subliminal messaging going on to affect Joe Mansueto's opinions, but you never know. I think Berhalter is absolutely qualified to take over this role. Looking at the criticism, though, that has come out, a lot has been made about Berhalter's tenure with the United States, as well as his lack of trophies with the Columbus Crew. I think we have to separate out his tenure with the U.S. men's national team when looking at whether this is a good hire for the Chicago Fire. The U.S. men's national team, or I should say the international game, is so much more different from a manager's perspective than the club game. And Berhalter had said it, that he wishes he could work with these players day in and day out, to be able to train with them and coach them and really get into the minutia of his game planning and drill things. And actually, in the episode I just recorded with the Battered MLS YouTube channel, Ty Fisher of the Wise Men Say podcast, the Columbus Crew show, said that he's looking forward to seeing how Berhalter and Wilfried Nancy kind of match up tactically in future games. So hopefully, or I should say, so the criticism of Berhalter as a bad USMNT coach doesn't necessarily translate to his club coaching. What I will say is, when people criticized him for being extremely inflexible and playing out the back when he didn't have the players, when he didn't have, or when he needed a sense of urgency to go find some goals, that I think still is valid criticism. However, we're in MLS, and it's a different style of play than the international game. So I still think that's valid, but not as much as a lot of Berhalter haters have been over the last few years. Criticizing his time at the Columbus Crew is a much more applicable, much more comparable criticism, I would say. And looking at his time at the Columbus Crew maybe can give us a little bit of a sense of expectations with what he's going to do with the Fire. But before we get into that, let's take our halftime break. Let's recognize our sponsor, Skira Icelandic Spring Water. Icelandic for clear, Skira water comes from a spring in a government-protected nature preserve in Iceland with naturally low mineral content. This isn't your average water. Clearly, pun intended, it's one of the best. And Skira Icelandic Spring Water is available at your local 7-Eleven. So getting back to his time with the Crew, he managed the Crew. He took over in November of 2013 and coached them through from the 2014 through the 2018 season, so 5 seasons. He reached the playoffs 4 of 5 years, getting to the 2015 MLS Cup, as we mentioned before. So according to Transfer Market, he coached the Crew for 192 matches. I think that takes into account those playoff games. 76 wins, 46 draws, and 70 losses, averaging 1.43 points per game over that time. As we know, the Chicago Fire, under Joe Mansueto's ownership, have averaged about 1 point per game over the tenure. So that would be a big improvement in and of itself, just from a points per game statistical standing standpoint. So a lot of people are saying, hey, that's 76 wins, 70 losses. He's average. He's about a 500 coach. Is that the guy you really want? Well, first of all, let's look at the Chicago Fire. Let's be honest. They have been a bottom 3 team for how many years? They've been a terrible, terrible team. If we get back to 500 and are, sitting in the 7-8 spot for the next 2 years, that would be huge improvement for the Chicago Fire. So again, we're starting with a low bar here. But let's take a look at those seasons individually. Now I'm jumping over to Wikipedia, so maybe these numbers won't exactly match up with how Transfer Market keeps track of it. I think this is just regular season. But in his 2014 campaign, his first year, the Crew ended up finishing third in the conference, 14 wins, 10 losses, 10 draws. But a very positive plus 10 goal differential. We have seen, though, that was his best season from a goal differential standpoint, but not his best season from an overall result standpoint. It was in 2015 where he had a 15 win, 11 loss, 8 draw season. And that is, again, we're still going back before, say, Atlanta United, Miami, Nashville. Was that New York City's first year, 2015? I'm forgetting my history here. But the league has changed. There's going to be a lot more competition, a lot different style of competition. So maybe that's going to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt as well. 2016, the wheels fell off. 8 wins, 14 losses, 12 draws, minus 8 goal differential, 1.06 points per game, ends up 9th place in the Eastern Conference. And that 2015 season, he ended up 2nd place in the Eastern Conference. But here's what's encouraging is that the next year he bounces back, gets that 16-win season in 2017, finishes 5th in the East, has a 14-win season in 2018 and finishes 5th in the East again, and then goes off and takes the USMNT job. So Berhalter, in his 4 good seasons, won between 14 and 16 games, and averaged between 1.5 and 1.59 points per game, 1.5, 1.59 points per game, and then had that one-off season. So you can look at this record and say he's average. And that's a fair criticism. However, the Fire could use average right now. I'd be happy with that. But also, look at the Columbus Crew at that time in their history. That was a very almost kind of prequel to the Save the Crew movement and them going to Austin and the ownership not investing in players. So you can criticize Berhalter's record, but you have to remember he was getting top 5 finishes in the Eastern Conference with an under-talented, is that the right word to say? A below-average talent roster. And that was always the appeal for him, is that the sum of the whole is greater than the individual parts. I can never get that phrase right. Am I saying that right? The sum of the whole is greater than the individual parts, whatever the phrase is. You know what I mean. He's getting the most out of his players. Now you put him in charge of the Chicago Fire, where not only does he get to coach the squad with an owner who's willing to spend, he's the one that gets to build the roster out, and he's got a lot of flexibility between 2 DP spots if they want to take the 3 DP route or go the 2 DP 4 under 22 spots plus the $2 million extra in GAM, which might be a pretty good option if you're going to start signing some young talent, maybe bringing up some guys from CF2. Or is he going to go big in his first year and bring in some DP players? We don't know. I would prefer the more roster build, rebuild friendly approach of the 2 DPs, 4 under 22 slots, and the extra general allocation money. So he now gets to build a roster in his own identity without having to worry about an ownership who either is trying to hamstring him purposely or doesn't care about his success or is looking to move the team. Mansueto is pretty much giving him the reins here to build the sporting side of this club the way he wants to. I think it's going to pay off, and I'm looking at how Mansueto built out the business side. He essentially goes, Dave Baldwin, do your thing. And a few years later, here we are with the Chicago Fire raking in all this money, extremely fan-friendly and fan-centric, and now it's time to do it on the pitch. Some other considerations that went into this hire or went into me reacting to the news of this is, first of all, the USMNT influence, especially the fact that we have Kellen Acosta, who has captained the USMNT, who's been a part of the USMNT for quite some time, and knows how to play Berhalter's style of ball. And we saw when Berhalter took over for the U.S., he had guys on that roster like a Will Trapp, like a Daniel Lovitz, who we knew were not cut out for the international level, but he put them on the team because it helped the others understand how he wanted to play. And Kellen Acosta can do that and probably will do that for the Chicago Fire and Gregg Berhalter. I just wonder, do you think this was all part of a long-term plan? Like, let's get Kellen, let's get Gregg. This is something they've been thinking about for a couple years. I don't know. Or maybe he's going to be able to recruit other USMNT pool players. We talked a little bit about this on the Battered MLS Fan Show. There's a lot of fans who are already clamoring for Weston McKennie, though I don't know why West would leave Juve. And I don't know, Juventus? I don't know why he would leave Italy to come play for Chicago, at least right now. Maybe give it a year or two if he's the missing piece, and then they want to throw a bag of money at Wes McKennie to come over. Maybe. Some people are saying Gio Reyna, who is not getting a lot of playing time at Nottingham or any other clubs that they may have been trying to shop him out to. But I don't know if the family relationship there is still not repaired after the whole Reyna saga during the World Cup. But that would be the kind of player that they're looking for. Someone who is at a lower tier club, not lower tier club, top league, lower club kind of a situation, bottom of the table type of club situation, who's looking for minutes. Or one example I gave is, would a player like Mark McKenzie want to come back to Chicago, come back to the States, and play for Gregg Berhalter here? A lot of players do like coming to play in MLS because you've got paycheck stability as opposed to some clubs around the world. You've got a much higher standard of living, and from year to year for some of those lower, God, I keep saying lower, and I don't mean to denigrate any sort of club or player, but unless you're Erling Haaland on Man City, you're not going to be getting hundreds of millions of dollars every year, so you can get yourself 2-3 years of some really good salary here in Major League Soccer. So maybe he does bring some pool players, maybe like a Joe Scally, like a De La Fuente, someone like that. Maybe Scally's not going to leave Germany, but players of that nature, Luca De La Torre, perhaps. And then Berhalter maybe does have a little bit of influence on Pochettino saying, hey, look, this guy's playing really well for me in MLS. Now, I don't think Pochettino is going to listen to a single word Berhalter has to say, but hey, the connections are there still. Let's see, what other things jumped out of the page? The roster rebuild absolutely is going to be huge. We talked about, let's talk about some of the players who might stick around. In my opinion, we've got 5 guys who are locks to be on this roster. We've got Chris Brady, and I only say a lock because of how well he's playing. It's possibility that he gets sold and they take that money and reinvest it in the club and then move up any number of goalkeepers in their academy system. But you've got Brady, you've got, I know I wrote this list down, I don't want to forget anyone here. You've got Brady, you've got Acosta, you've got Mauricio Pineda, you've got Brian Gutierrez, and you've got Hugo Kuipers. Those are my 5 guys who I would not touch if I'm Gregg Berhalter coming into this team. And part of it is because not only are they the up-and-comers, they're the talent, they're the faces of the team. 3 of those guys are on homegrown contracts, so you're getting a lot more roster flexibility with Brady, Gutierrez, and Pineda. Acosta, he can be your captain, he can be your transition guy to Berhalter style. Kuipers, your $12 million DP striker, you're not going to move him. Plus, he has proven how good he can be. As bad as this Fire team is, he had 11 goals? At least 10 goals on the season so far. Maybe he can bag 1 or 2 more for in the final game against Nashville. And by the way, he is on the list of Newcomer of the Year nominees in the MLS End of Season Awards. We'll go over that probably in the next show, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Hey, and if you want, let me know who you think you want to see, or who's deserving of MVP, Newcomer, Comeback Player, Coach of the Year type stuff, and we'll talk about that in the next episode. So those are my 5 untouchables. I would like to see Wyatt Olmsberg stick around and Carlos Turan stick around. Both of those guys have a lot of injury problems. Turan has a bit of a temper. He needs a good coach to keep him in check. He needs a good captain, a defensive captain at that, to keep him in check as well. I would like to see Ariel Lassiter stick around. I think to have a veteran on, only having to pay $75,000 for that transfer for next year. It was 75 this year, 75 next year if the Fire pick up his option. I don't know what his salary is like, but he is a 7-year, I don't know if he'll be considered an 8th-year MLS veteran at that point. So his salary might be a little bit higher, and maybe Gregg, wearing his director of football hat, is going to say, nope, we don't want that salary on the books. But I would like to see Lassiter stick around and Olmsberg stick around if possible. I would like to see Andrew Gutman stay. I think he's as close to a lock as you're going to get, assuming his continued health throughout the offseason. Other than that, get rid of Fede Navarro. The dude picks up yellow cards and he hasn't even been on the pitch for a full minute. Get rid of Gaston Jimenez. He's not worth the money. He doesn't know how to transition from defense to offense. Get rid of Chris Mueller, and I hate to say it because I really like the Mueller signing when it happened, but he has been a different player since his injury, and he just can't find the net. If you're going to be a winger, you got to find the net 4 or 5 times throughout the season. He keeps finding above the net, shooting way high most of the time, and his frustration, his body language when he's not getting the passes is kind of discouraging as a fan, to see as a fan, and I'm sure his teammates feel that way too. But it's like, dude, we pass you the ball and you sky it over the net. Like, if we're gonna pass it to you, you better put a shot on goal or start scoring a few goals. Martin Haile Selassie, he might be as close to a lock as you can get. I put him in kind of that Andrew Gutman tier of not a lock, but probably because we're going to be focusing on other areas of the roster. But he's got to be utilized the right way. I think he can be a great player like we saw in the 2023 season. A lot of combination play up the wing depending on how Berhalter wants to play. I'd love to see Aragoni stick around, but I don't know if they're going to return him to Lugano on his loan or if they are going to exercise the purchase option on his contract. I'd like to see him stick around. Chihos, great player for the Fire, gave it all, longtime captain. I don't know if he's got the legs and the health to stay a starting center back in MLS, especially with all the new games and all the games that are on a schedule. Let's see, who am I forgetting? Oh, our strikers here. We know Kuipers is a lock to stay. I think Kutsia should stay, and I think they should develop him. However, if they can get a couple million for him with a sell-on clause, it might be hard to turn down, as director of football Gregg Berhalter is trying to get money in order to rebuild the roster. I'd be okay if they let Tom Barlow go, as we were joking around with the Designated Players Pod on Twitter, saying, it's unfair for the Chicago Fire to have Barlow for this long, to pair him up and have such a great coaching striker duo. Other teams need to experience Tom Barlow, so let's move him along. But yeah, Barlow, despite a couple goals late in the season, did pretty much nothing for the Chicago Fire, so I think they can move on for him. And for what it was worth, I think it was a $250,000 transfer fee. Not the most money, nothing you'd be really hurting if you decided to let him go. And if they do that U22 roster designation spot with 2 DPs and 4 U22s instead of 3 DPs and 3 U22s, they get that $2 million in general allocation bonus that they could probably get from a couple transfers or a single transfer or based on their past transfers. And hey, that John Duran might get himself a big sale and the Fire might get their sell-on percentage, so they would have that extra money to use and would probably be okay eating whatever the cost of Tom Barlow would be. So that's how I'm looking at Gregg Berhalter's job here. You've still got Suke, you've still got Dean. You got to worry about what you're going to do with those guys. Dean is probably going to stay just because it makes financial sense, as well as he's got a little bit of a rapport with whoever's in the defense, and maybe you do want to have some continuity. Suke, I think, is making too much money, and I think his legs are gone, so I would like to see him gone as well. But again, these are the kind of questions that new director of football Gregg Berhalter is going to have to ask himself and answer, and we'll see. What I do like is that I think Berhalter is strong enough where if Klopp says do this, and Berhalter disagrees, then he won't do it. That he will not just follow whatever Klopas says, as we have seen the case with the Fire organization over the last 3 years or so. So that's my take on everything Gregg Berhalter. There's a couple other Chicago Fire announcements that I want to get to before we wrap tonight. First of all, 3 Chicago Fire players have been called up to national team duty for the October FIFA window. We have Yorgos Koutsias called up to the Greek U21 national team. We have Ariel Lassiter, who got called up to the Costa Rica men's national team, and Sergio Orejel Jr. called up to the U.S. U20 men's youth national team. So congratulations to the three of them as they get their international call-ups. And the last little bit, I want to respond... some CF2 announcements. Chicago Fire 2 make the playoffs. They host Orlando City B in the first round. And their captain, David Pareba, wins the MLS Next Pro Golden Boot Award. He's got 18 goals in 29 appearances, 27 starts. So great season for CF2 and Pareba. Let's hope they can advance and hopefully bring home a trophy in MLS Next Pro. However, Orlando City B has been a bit of a boogeyman for them over the course of the season. So we'll see if they can overcome that in the playoffs. Last little bit of thought, I want to get to some fan mail here. Ryan sends, speaking of international break, Ryan sends me this following message. Would MLS benefit from ignoring international breaks? This is America, and we aren't used to having sports not centered around the U.S., and I think these international breaks kill momentum for the average fan. The ones MLS are trying to convert to a weekly viewer. This isn't the Prem, La Liga, or Bundesliga where half the roster would be gone, a couple starters here and there. But with viewer number and streams behind Apple, it's kind of hard to tell. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Well, here are my thoughts, Ryan. I think as a general premise, you're right. The MLS would benefit from either ignoring international breaks or potentially changing up their schedule. And by doing so, it's changing their schedule to just play through them. We saw that during the World Cup some years back, and a lot of people detracted. But we only had... how many players, right? 18 players at that time on the roster, maybe 20 players on the roster at that time, going off. And most of them were playing in MLS because it was still a relatively young league, and the player pool hadn't expanded, and these guys hadn't been going overseas. So MLS could do that and have still a stable of other MLS players, bench players, ready to go. Now, though, you're starting to see a lot of international players join MLS. So for the Chicago Fire, they might be losing 3 players, 2 of whom are on the bench, if you're looking at Lassiter as a starter and Koutsias and Orejel coming off the bench. And Orejel, who I don't think got a senior minute this year, maybe he did make 1 or 2 short, quick appearances. It wouldn't affect the Chicago Fire very much. We saw Xherdan Shaqiri get call-ups. It would maybe affect him. But I think across the league, and the MLS is really touting the fact that they have a lot of international players. So as much as I would like to see, MLS try to tweak their schedule a little bit, I don't think the league would benefit from ignoring the breaks because so many players would be gone. And until they start to open up some of the roster rules a little bit more, which they're going to have to do to accommodate for Leagues Cup, U.S. Open Cup, Champions Cup, and whatever else comes their way, Club World Cup for a couple teams, it's not going to benefit them because you're just going to be missing too many players. You're going to be missing your big name players. But you're absolutely right. The fact that MLS pauses for these international breaks, like the other leagues do, you do lose the everyday fan. You do lose the habitual viewer. I gotta turn in every week. Saturday evening, let's pop on the MLS game. Oh wait, there's no MLS game. Where I think they can fill that void is if Apple continues to expand their MLS-based programming. Right now, we have the games, we have the pregame, the postgame, the 360. You've got extra time. You've got some other little content that gets put out by some of the clubs and some stuff on Apple, which is mostly just short highlight clips with good editing rather than original content. But if they can start putting out some more original content and almost have like a TV show, like an MLS sitcom or something that we could watch, that would be an interesting show. Then you could keep them engaged and interested, maybe have some featured games, maybe find a couple teams that won't have international players and maybe put them up, or have an exhibition that's televised, something of that nature to fill that void. Then I think maybe you can kind of avoid some of that, like you said, losing the momentum. All right, with all of that out of the way, we're going to wrap for this episode. Thank you so much to everyone who's tuned in, written in, tweeted, email, Facebook, everything that you do to engage with me. It's a lot of fun to hear from you and talk to you all. Especially, thank you for viewing on YouTube. Thank you for listening wherever you get your podcasts. Rate, review, like, subscribe, share the show. Let's grow the show, and let's go fire.